Welcome everyone to Idiot Seeking Village. I am Rich. That is Adam. Happy Lupercalia.
What is that? And it sounds frightening.
It should be frightening to you. It is actually the ancient Roman festival of purifying the city of Rome on February the 15th of every year to promote health and fertility.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And how did they go about that?
Well, they had little purification instruments that were named after the Roman god Phoebus, who was all about purification, cleanliness, and things like that. And those instruments, the Februa, are the basis for our month of February. So you just learned something today.
I did, and now I want to know more.
Yeah, we should probably do like a mythology and ancient random shit podcast. I think it'll be better for our mental health, and I think we'd learn a lot in the process.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah,
I'm so intrigued already.
We're changing formats. Bye, everyone.
Who cares about our future? Let's go work on our past. Can't be much worse.
What future are we talking about here? Yeah, no, it's a good question, right? This kind of really spiked for me, two and a half weeks ago, right? Was kind of in the wake of Renee Good getting killed, of Alex Preddy getting killed in Minnesota, that Pam Bondi, as part of those negotiations that the Trump White House was having with Minnesota, the state, and Minneapolis, the city, they made what to me seemed like a very strange request at the time, which was they demanded three things. The first two were very immigration, policing related, pretty standard and straightforward. But the third one that kind of came out of nowhere with no context whatsoever was a demand for Minnesota to turn over its voter rolls to the administration, to the federal government. And I was like, what the hell does that have to do with anything relating to de-escalating ISIS presence on the streets and stop killing American citizens in cold blood, right? And I kind of been digging in a little bit, and I feel like a lot of stuff, I'm kind of glad we've had a little bit of time since that first one, because we've had multiple election-related items come up, and this feels almost not like a part two to our first episode, right? Redistricting and representation, but almost like a corollary to like what's happening today and what's happening now. Since then, the Make Elections Great Again Act was introduced into the House on January 29th. And we've also had a lot of movement, a lot of noise from Trump himself about the feds directly taking over elections in a number of Democratic Party-led states ahead of this upcoming election. Yeah, so we've got, like I said, it started with like what the hell, this is kind of weird, and then like, bam, the hammer dropped immediately on multiple fronts around this. So
I can only imagine how many episodes we've done where we have hinted or mentioned that if you think we're going to have a real fair election come 2026, you are out of your mind.
I think that's kind of become almost a meme, right? You see a lot of people commenting online and making statements like, bold you to assume we're even going to have elections. And it's like, we're going to have elections, but they're going to be elections like in Hungary or in Russia or in North Korea, right? Where the incumbent wins with some unassailable proportion or some absolute number proportion of the votes that just make it clear it's a sham election. Not all that dissimilar from what Nicolas Maduro was doing in Venezuela, the last two election cycles that they had, right? Where they didn't report the numbers, they said they won, and everyone's like, the hell you did, right? You report the numbers, report the vote counts, and they didn't, and they just kind of held on to power. So I think that's really what we're starting to see a lot of the groundwork being laid for here at this moment.
It's, what's funny is that it's so simple. All these solutions are so simple, but they refused, they want to have, you have to have a voter ID, you have to have passports, you have to have all this paperwork. If all this is so important, and I'm fine with, having to show ID, I can't argue with it. If it's so important and that's something you want to accomplish, then work hard to make sure everyone has access to obtaining that who's legally allowed to, and set up to utilize that in an election in the future. Do not do it months beforehand. You only do that months beforehand if you're trying to fuck people over.
And that's the thing, right? They have been going at this little piece by piece for the better part of the last year, ever since this administration came in, right, and started. And there was a bit John Oliver did actually not that long ago where they were looking at Wisconsin specifically, and there was like this one office that if you were not a driver, right, like because the states offer non-driver identification because not everyone drives for whatever various reason, right? And it turned out that that office was only open on the fifth Wednesday of every month. And this was looking at it, this is years ago, right? In 2016, that meant that that office was available to people for literally 4 days that entire year because of the way that it operated, right? And so these become a de facto, or effective poll tax on this, right? Because if you need this ID and, oh, by the way, you don't fall into the kind of, well, I'm a driver and so I have an ID on me anyway, and it happens to be valid, right? It kind of falls, a lot of things fall through the cracks. One thing that recently happened, on NPR reported this, was the State Department was actually pulling back passport processing from non-governmental organizations. Specifically, they were targeting libraries that were not directly run by municipalities or governments, but were being operated as not-for-profit entities. What that means, and there's a lot of these here in the Northeast, around where we live, some 45 to 55% in New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, etc., libraries fall under this kind of non-governmental organizational standing, and they take a lot of those passport requests and support from from someone having to go to the State Department office or from going to the post office and the postal workers having to deal with it, right? So, and these are a major one, they're a little bit of a revenue stream for these organizations. They're not for profits, but also it's just restricting access, right? And that rolled out about a month and a half ago that they're doing this. Now these states are fighting it, but you look at someone like Pennsylvania, actually some 85% of their libraries are not municipally or government run. They fall into this non-governmental organization or not for profit. So you're looking at Pennsylvania, you have millions of voters in Pennsylvania. Now 85% of them who may have gone to this sort of organization to take care of this passport, to get this citizenship record, right, to get this ironclad paperwork to allow them to vote, now are losing access. And by the way, the election is in less than 9 months at this point.
Yeah, it's let's pass a law to change this. Yeah. How are we executing on this? It doesn't matter.
Well, that's the problem, right? It's the execution. It's like, look, I'm with you in terms of, look, I don't necessarily have a problem with voter ID law. I've worked in local elections. I have trained with the election board. I've gone through the process. I understand how it works. We don't have voter ID here in New York, right? Because when you go through the registration process, you validate these things, right? So it becomes part of the process when you register to vote that they are validating that you can vote, right? So you don't need.
Also, it's not naked though. It's like you sign your name, and they compare it to another signature a lot of the times.
Name,
at least that's what I've saw next time.
Yeah, name, address, date of birth. You can validate. You validate against the signature. Exactly. There's multiple forms of validation against that you don't need to be carrying ID with you when you go, because it's pretty straightforward. And by the way, again, I worked a couple of elections. We're trained. If you're in doubt, you just escalate right to the supervisor, who's going to push, right, to kind of validate a little bit, kind of more under the radar sort of stuff.
Right. And if you're afraid that Juan is going to steal your name and go vote, I don't think Juan's going to be able to duplicate my weird ass signature without really studying it. Yeah. And even then he might not be able to do it. So I'm not really sure what you guys are afraid of.
Well, that's the thing.
In red states, they just show up.
In any election, there's always a little bit of voter fraud. And in almost every single case, the voter fraud is some Republican. It almost is always a Republican. Like you can't find, the opposite happening, where they voted for a dead relative or parent, right? And they still have the name and address on file and things of that nature. Or they, someone who shuttles between like New York and Florida and voted in both jurisdictions or something along those lines. It's almost never an illegal voting. But the funny part is, right, in conjunction with ICE's raids and all this, there's actually a mayor in, I want to say it was Kansas, it may have been Oklahoma, but he was like a 53-year-old mayor. He turns out he was actually a Mexican national. He came to this country when he was 4 years old, and he'd been voting in elections for the last 15 years or so. And he claimed he didn't realize that he was doing it illegally. Major Trumper, major Republican. He goes, I don't even look at the names. I just vote in the Republican column, and I've been voting for years now. So not only is he facing felony voting fraud charges, and again, he was the mayor of this town in Oklahoma or wherever it was around there, but now he's also facing deportation because he's a Mexican national.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
He'll somehow just be pardoned and given an award.
I don't know.
And a cabinet seat.
But yeah, I think what you were starting to get to, right? I don't disagree with you. Like, voter ID or having like a good ironclad process in place. I'm not, they first off, the states are in charge, right? That is the Constitution. Article 1, Section 4, whatever it is, right? Is the states determine the time, place, and method of elections. I agree that there should be some consistency. If not, for the least of which is we have a deep and very virulent history of voter suppression in this country, right? So I want to know that there aren't shenanigans going on elsewhere. I do. But demanding that you provide proof of ID or bring your birth certificate or something along those lines every single time with you, it's a solution in search of a problem. But if you're going to do that, then you should be handing out IDs like candy on Halloween to anyone who can validate this, right? And you need to make this easy and free for everyone involved, because the goal shouldn't be suppressing votes. It should be ensuring everyone who should be voting has easy access to vote without any problems.
Yep. If voting is so important, we should be spending millions upon millions of having buses going to like certain locations, and shouldn't be like rock the vote, spending money doing it to get people to vote. Have all these buses out there, sign people up, give them IDs if that's what they need, make them show you proof to give them IDs, and give them IDs, and how they say, okay, it'll be mailed to you in a week or so, and that's it. But you don't do it months before an election.
Yeah.
You're never going to execute enough in time.
I mean, it's even better, right? You still get the temporary card, right? Like DMV here in New York gives you a temporary license when you need a new one, a paper one, until your real one comes in. Shit, the community center where I swam as a kid growing up did the same thing. They would do a laminated version that they would mail to you, but they give you a paper copy so that at least you could access the facilities in the meantime. We're not even doing that level of access for people at the moment for voting.
We won't.
And even better than busing everyone and ensuring that it's as available as possible and easy to access, just make the damn day a national holiday so people don't have to take time off of work. And we have all these convoluted rules around, your boss should give you 2 hours before, 2 hours after. Like, dude, just give the day off so that all citizens can go and vote. This shouldn't be complicated. But the point is not voter security, and protecting people. It's about repression and making sure that only the right kind of people vote.
Yeah. When I see blood trucks at schools, if you can do that, you can have people doing that for IDs, and do it immediately and do it often and do it well in advance. Now, if you say you institute it now for the 2028 election, then I'm saying, okay, then you need by 2028, you have to have that, but you have to show that you've spent a shit ton of money executing on it, not just passing a law and they're like, oh yeah, we haven't passed any money yet. We haven't allocated any money to do this yet.
Well, in the same way, like when did they launch that? Like back after 9/11 was that whole Real ID push, and they had to delay that multiple years to roll out. I think it's finally like almost 20, almost 25 years later at this point, finally kind of implemented, but it took a quarter of a century, essentially, right, from start to finish, to get real ID out there and to get all the states on board and to start getting it out there en masse. And by the way, people are still going through the process to get a real ID from the government. Right?
I think I got one a number of years ago, and I was like, I knew I wanted just because I know you could go into Canada or Mexico with it. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, if I got to escape this country because we fall apart, I got that.
Yeah.
But I didn't know like all the finer details of it. It has to be through land. It can't be water, air, or any of that. You have to do it over land. And I was like, oh shit. It's like, so I can go to those islands, but I can't really because there's no way to get there by land. So that was out of the...
Yeah, I got it because I would travel often for work. And, I was like, let me just get on this as soon as possible. But I found out my wife, like, I think at some point last year, like, she didn't have one. I'm like, dude, how did you not still get this? And I think my mother-in-law, same thing. It was like, you all renewed...
Mine doesn't have it either.
Well, that's the thing, right? We have been, even if you've gotten a renewed license in the last handful of years, that doesn't mean that you got a real ID. Right. And the real ID process, I believe, validates citizenship as part of it. So we've been doing this whole process and kind of skipping these steps because it's half-assed and it's being rushed and it's being pushed. Again, not because we're actually trying to keep elections safe and secure. Elections have been safe and secure. What we're trying to do is trying to make sure that people that we don't want voting don't vote. The crazy part to me is this push that you're seeing from the Trump administration, which kind of happened during the first administration, the first time around, where they kind of had that whole, the Election Integrity Commission back in 2017, 2018, when they were like looking, desperately for instances of voter fraud and they couldn't find any really. In the same way, they're kind of pushing this and they're not finding anything.
Yeah, people have to wake up and realize, like, isn't it amazing that we have so much concern over voter fraud and it only ever happened during Mr. Trump's time. Nobody worried about this before he came along, and now we're all worried about it now that he has come along. That should tell everybody just something. He lost the popular vote, so now he needed to find ways to say, oh, people were lying about how they voted. That he definitely got more votes in this, because gosh forbid he should have had less votes than Hillary Clinton. And then he lost the fraud. It was all fraud. Now, if there was fraud in the Biden-Trump election, why in the world would Biden and Harris allow Trump to win again?
Exactly.
Come on. How stupid do you have to be?
I remember the first time they were like, yeah, so they would bring the vote, the ballots over to people, and the people would vote, it'd be Democratic operatives, and they'd make sure that they check the box for Biden. But then you look at the actual voter tallies and you're like, okay, yeah, they voted for Biden, but then they voted Republican down the ticket for the most part, or something similar, right? Or they kind of mix and match, and they're like, so you didn't, if you had this large grassroots campaign to get the vote out and make sure that Biden got the votes instead of Trump, and that's how they were manipulating, you wouldn't bother to make sure that your state senators, your House representatives, your federal senators, and everyone else was also in line party-wise, right? Like,
yeah, well, Soros only paid for the top of the ticket vote. He didn't pay for the rest, so you couldn't get that unless you got paid extra.
Right, exactly. It's like, I'm still, I would love a Soros check. Dude's loaded. I mean, do I have to submit for like direct deposit? Like, how does this work?
Yeah, how much is my vote worth?
Exactly.
Sell it to the highest bidder. Put it on eBay. I'm going to auction off my vote.
You know what? I mean, you get yourself, no, it's not allowed. You would potentially face federal charges if you attempted to do that. But as we saw with Elon Musk literally, quote unquote, buying votes ahead of last election. Remember, he had those whole, the $1 million giveaways if you signed up, but it turned out they weren't actual giveaways. The people were predetermined. The winners were predetermined ahead of time because, of course, Elon Musk is scamming people. Like, that is really fucking illegal. That should have landed him in jail, right? Because he was literally buying the votes. But I think they made the argument.
But he's the president.
I think they made the argument that, well, these people were going to vote this way anyway, so we weren't actually buying their vote. And I think that's how, on a technicality, he got off that way. But yeah, like literally, we had an open vote buying scheme, or at least it was presented as such, and it didn't go anywhere. But what I wanted to, again, sticking with this request to Minnesota that kind of piqued my interest. I wanted to focus on kind of this most recent push, right? Like I said, it's been going on for the better part of the last year. Starting in May of 25, the DOJ began demanding full unredacted voter rolls from the states. Now, because of the Voting Rights Act and whatnot, that and the Civil Rights Act and everything that were passed ages and ages ago, again, remember, these were targeting like Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, right? Where places where voter suppression, Jim Crow, everything were really, really prevalent. Now we're starting to see those same rules that were given to us because of the Voting Rights Act being leveraged against states where they haven't been pointed to in the past. So technically speaking, the DOJ is within its right to be asking for these things from the states as part of the Voting Rights Act and whatnot. That said, the states were like, the hell you are, insert your Jason Bateman meme. And as of January, 2 weeks ago, there's ongoing litigation in over half the states against providing this data, because the data that was demanded was complete statewide voter registration lists, driver's license numbers, at least partial social security numbers, and full unredacted data. So there could be, again, every state manages its elections differently, and so there's varying levels of personal identifying information. And these states are like, we're not just giving all this data to you. How are we even going to know that you are, dealing with the data in a secure manner, that it doesn't get out there, that this doesn't just end up being hacked easily, and now suddenly tens of millions, hundreds of millions of voters' data is out there on the black market and being used against them.
Regardless, they can't even figure out how to handle the Epstein files. One person's files. How are they going to deal with all this information properly? Bullshit. It's all bullshit. And until America realizes that we're being scammed on like the most epic of scales, I just don't know what to say anymore about things.
Yeah. So do you remember back during the Obama administration, a thing called Crosscheck?
No.
Okay. So Crosscheck was started by Chris Kobach, who I believe was the governor. I'm just double checking right here. Yes, perfect. So yeah, Crosscheck was started in 2005, actually. So excuse me, I apologize. It wasn't during Obama, it was during Bush too. Ron Thornburg, who was the Kansas Secretary of State, started it. And then the Chris Kobach administration is really when it kind of kicked up and started to peak, which was during the Obama years. So clarifying for myself there. But basically, what they started to do was this broad goal of identifying and purging voter data to prevent duplicate entries, right? So the idea is if you registered in one county or town to vote, and then you moved and you registered in a new place, the idea should be, hey, let's make sure we get rid of that old registration, right? And so that you can't vote in two different places. Sounds simple, but the problem is they only work off of very basic data, right? They might have a partial name for you. They have a partial birth date, a partial social security number, something along those lines. They might not even have all of that information. And so if you have like 2 Jim Smiths or like 10 Jim Smiths, you might be like, all right, well, we're just going to take the most recent one that registered, and these other ones are a similar age based on what we know. We're just going to wipe them all off and kick that out. And it's had a lot of problems. It created a lot of false positives of people who weren't registered to vote, who were getting kicked off of voter rolls. And again, each state manages their own voters. Sometimes you don't realize that you've been kicked off the voter rolls until you actually show up at the polling place. But it turns out to actually be eligible to vote, you had to finish registering at least a month before the election or something similar. So now you're disenfranchising people who should be eligible to vote because you did this very sloppy, control find on a list and deleted anything that was a duplicate and just had what you believe to be unique entries. This actually kind of came to a head because this process was rolled out beyond Kansas Texas was doing this as well. In Harris County alone, which is where I believe Houston is, if I recall correctly, 25% false positive rates. So multiple thousands of Texans were being kicked off the voter rolls unnecessarily. And a lot of them disproportionately flagged naturalized citizens, right? People who weren't born here originally, weren't originally citizens, but came here, went through the process, and became citizens. Very much like a heavy, heavy bias to kicking those people off as well. So this kind of went on until like I think 2019 or so, where they were kind of rolling this out, and they kind of gave up on it because the methodology had a lot of security flaws, and it had this disproportionate impact on people who shouldn't have been flagged, right? Way too many false positives. But now, instead of what we're seeing is kind of the next evolution of it, right? It didn't die and go away. It's now being revived as part of this new DOJ push to, instead of, hey, let the states coordinate it. Here's kind of this state-based thing that started in Kansas and expands to other states. They're trying to push it top down federally, kind of a very similar and same system. That's why you have these states, right? Almost half the states are actively in lawsuits going, what the fuck are you doing with our data? And what are you going to do here, right? Constitutionally, you don't have the right to tell us what's going on in our voter rolls, and you're not really providing a purpose here other than what seems to be a fishing expedition.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of illusions that they try to portray on the people to believe that this is what they're doing for the best interest of the voters, and they're really not. The Fed should take a bunch of money, develop a system that works, and offer it up to the states to try to implement it, and they work together to do things correctly. But at the end of the day, it's just red and blue. That's all it comes down to. I can't agree with you. You're red. Doesn't matter. You're blue. Nope.
Well, and that's the problem right now is this administration is so blatantly partisan. They are clearly targeting blue states, right? Democratic run states to suppress the vote, to kind of kick people off the voters. I mean, honestly, I'm looking at this and going, I need to double check, like, when is my voter registration due? Because there's another dude in town, right? In your town, actually, right across the border here, who has the same name as me, like same last name. So I'm going to wonder if they look, well, that's a really uncommon name, and you have two different addresses. This is bullshit, and they strike one of us. Right. I'm genuinely curious if that's the kind of thing that's going to happen. But I mean, ahead of the election, I'm going to be triple checking that I am in fact registered. Right. And that I'm good to go.
It's just not going to happen for like the other millions of people in this country are not going to do that, or the state.
Yeah. And the worst part is now this is called, so what Crosscheck has evolved into is what's being called the SAVE Act, SAVE. And the problem is they are sharing this data with ICE. They're using it deliberately to target non-citizens as well, right? So it's not just, hey, we want to just double check the voter rolls, make sure everything's kosher, that everyone's voting who should be voting. They are actively using it as part of immigration enforcement. And so there's an extra reason for the states to be like, you have no right under the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act to be going after this data and to be using it the way you're using it.
And that's just sadder and sadder how the truth just evolves more and more, and how obvious it is, and the fact that there's just so many people who just don't see it or refuse to see it. It's just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
They don't want you to vote, period. They much rather you just say, all right, whatever. They just want to keep their jobs. They want to keep their money. They want to keep their power. They don't give a fuck about you.
I mean, look, I think kind of what we were chatting about earlier, right, is, look, I'm not opposed to better, more standardized ways of ensuring election integrity. I think it's critical these days, right? And I think we need more standards, but purging voter rolls is not the way to go about that. And demanding ID without ensuring that ID is readily, easily accessible to everyone is, again, not the way to go about that. And let's be honest, if we're going to be addressing the voting process, we need to ensure that representation is happening. And we should be kind of looking at this big picture. We need to make sure, we need some form of ranked choice voting or, proportional representation. We need this first past the post system where winner takes all is out there, is gone, because we need to break this two-party system. The problem, of course, is it's not profitable for either of the big parties to do this. And the bigger issue, broadly speaking, politically, is I feel like Americans so much are, like, what are the Democrats doing? Why aren't you doing anything? Why aren't you fighting against this sort of stuff? We would expect in any normal functioning democracy that the opposition parties would be actually opposing these sort of things and fighting for the interest of the people. And they're not, because we're trying to force our concerns on someone who doesn't actually share those concerns.
Yeah, at least not enough of them. It's just
right.
Party lines down the middle because Papa Trump wants this and Papa Trump will get this.
Mm-hmm. And Schumer, Jeffries, Pelosi, they don't want it either, right? It's not a priority for them to do this. Pollsters, political planners, they like predictability. They like to be able to forecast where they're going to win and where they're going to lose, much in the way that you don't hold a vote without knowing the outcome of that vote, right? If you're a politician or a parliamentarian, they don't want to input or, roll out systems or process or whatnot that could disenfranchise them from being in power. And if they don't know what the outcome is going to be, they're not going to do it. It's the same thing with that whole conversation about, like, well, Puerto Rico should become a state, or, why doesn't Guam or whatever become a state, and all these other things. Like, well, because there's a lot of presumptions about which way those people would vote who live in those areas. Like, why don't we break California up into multiple states that would better represent people? Have been doing that one for years. It's like, because it's not going to be broken up proportionally. And one party or another is going to win out or lose out in a way that they don't want to.
Yeah, I think, it's funny. You said it, and it just reminded me of something that's bothered me for a while with the winning and losing. I think that has become such a norm in this country when it comes to voting that we have to remember it's not winning or losing. You're not winning or losing when you run for election. You are basically submitting an application for a job, and you are being hired or not hired. How many people, when you don't get a job, do you say, oh, I didn't win that job, I lost that job? No. You didn't get hired. These people are looking to be hired by you, by us.
Right. Well, that's I think the theory, right? I remember when I was learning about this in civics classes, like in like junior high or whatever, was the question is, if you're an elected official, are you there to represent your voters' interests or the interests of your party? Like, which way does that fall? And I think we all, being young and idealistic and kids, were like, no, you should be representing your voters' interests. But that's not how it actually works. We are just this popularity check that's almost this complete facade of democratic process. Like, really, do the people you vote for actually represent the interests of you, the people, or are they representing the interests of their donors and of the donors to their party, and make sure that those get priority over anything else? And unfortunately, it's the latter. It really is the latter.
Yeah, you care about people voting to preserve your democracy. How about creating a better democracy?
Exactly. Why?
I don't see you lining up for that.
Well, I think that kind of goes into, look, if you go through the Federalist Papers and all this sort of stuff, you look at the Founding Fathers, we're all about, like, this, the Constitution shouldn't be this calcified document. It should be a living document. I think it was Jefferson who wanted every 10 or 20 years for there to be a new constitutional convention so that every generation could be, like, put in their own rules around how things should operate, that it shouldn't be something that just stays there forever. And it's become this thing where you have this push over the last few years, and this is another kind of, I don't think it's a Heritage Foundation thing necessarily, but it is very much pushed by Republican and Republican-aligned interests, where they want to hold a constitutional convention, which we haven't done in ages and ages and ages, right? And they want to hold the constitutional convention because the default behavior for the Constitutional Convention is that it's a representation of the states. And when the majority of governors and legislatures for states in this country are managed by the Republicans, they know that they can go in this constitutional convention and ram their agenda through without having to compromise and get the changes that they want. And that's the thing. We should have a constitutional convention, but in my opinion, by no means whatsoever should the existing power base be allowed to call the shots.
Yeah.
Because they know how they're going to come out on the other end of it. The only proper way to organize like a constitution, or when you think about how to structure society and whatnot, is if you don't know where you're going to end up. If you know where you're going to be, you will manipulate the system, the process, and the rules to benefit you and make sure that you still come out on top. The only truly fair way to do it is if you don't know, right? And that's the only way you actually create an actual equitable society where everyone's voice matters.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know how we implement common sense into a broad agenda for the American people to understand these things or want to understand these things. And I think that's something we keep missing. And I don't know where it is, and I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, it's how do you attack the entrenched power structure? They have no interest in it. Like, let's just say you ran for president, right? And you were successfully able to secure the presidency on this platform. You still need Congress to get on board with you, right? To pass the legislation to make this a law. You need the states to get on board with you to make changes to the Constitution and to pass. Like, you have to get such a swath of, approval, right, and support that they could just look at you and go like, we're just going to sit you out for the next 4 years and not going to change anything because fundamentally we'll be back in power.
Yeah, you would have to be a president who wins like landslide beyond landslide. You have to win like almost all the states by a good margin. And then it would be like, well, I got 4 years. A lot of you only have 2. I'll sit you guys out and get rid of you because the people who voted for me are going to want to replace you with people who are going to vote with me. And then the senators, I'll win, and odds are, since I won by such a landslide, I'll be here again in 4 years, and you won't be. So listen to your constituents or you're gone.
I got news for you, man.
Good luck.
I mean, basically, Obama's first term was that kind of landslide, right? I mean, he got 365 electoral votes. He got, 53% of the popular vote at that point. Like, that was probably the closest we have since the Reagan, right? Since Reagan to a mandate, and still, nothing changed.
Because the difference was it did change with Reagan. He fucked up a lot of shit. But Obama, he still had to fight the fact that he was black. And I think that was something a lot of people were able to push back on, and they went with this crazy healthcare agenda that just sucked up a lot of time.
I think more than the fact that he was black is it's 2008. I mean, having a funny Muslim sounding name, it's
a financial crisis too.
And the financial crisis, well, that's the thing. The financial crisis should have been an opportunity, but he went in and he governed like a party line centrist after having run during the campaign as a progressive, right? He completely bait and switch his entire thing. And the frustration was, I think, to what we're saying right now is you actually had that opportunity. You had an opportunity, you had a crisis, you had a mandate, and you had a candidate, and then they immediately folded it into the existing power structure and didn't actually pursue any of these things. And that was probably the closest we've come recently to actually being able to pull that off.
Yeah, and I think he ruined a lot of people's hopes.
Hey, he fucked up a lot of things as a
lack
result
of his change.
Yeah, and like I said, there's absolutely anti-Islamophobia, there's absolutely racism, right, that went into a lot of the resistance to him. But I'm blaming him directly for not running with the mandate that he got, because we needed wholesale overhaul, and he could have pushed for that. The people who voted for him wanted for that to happen, and it didn't happen. By the way, I didn't vote for either of them, so I have no fucking, horse in this race, right? It would have been nice, though. I would have liked to have seen it. Didn't happen.
One on hope and change. You're expecting one of those things?
Well, it's the old line, right? Hope, wish into one hand, shit in the other, and see which one fills up first, or something like
Is
that.
that really a saying? Oh
Something,
God.
yeah, something along those lines. I actually had a buddy who was anti-Obama tell me that one about hope and change. I was like, okay, that's clever. Yeah.
People are like, I mean, that's why a lot of people voted for Trump. They wanted something to change. They
Hmm.
just for some reason got suckered into a con man thinking that he was going to bring the change that they wanted.
Yeah.
And he wasn't going to bring a bigger swamp.
Right. We touched on that is, Obama came in, change didn't happen. Trump came in, change hasn't happened. Like, at least not in a positive way, not in the way you'd actually want it to be. Like, the American voter is voting anti-establishment pretty consistently. That is a message that resonates no matter what. But you're right. Is it Trump campaigned on drain the swamp, and we have Pam Bondi literally going in front of Congress and screaming to defend the swamp at this point and kind of backing it up and covering up for the swamp. It is just, we get these folks into power who should have the opportunity to make changes that the voters want, right? Trump voters, Obama voters all wanted change. And we're not getting the change that we want. And the change that we are getting in a limited scope is not structural change, it's not systemic change, but it is deeply anti-citizen, it's anti-person, right? It's not benefiting us in any sort of way.
The change we always keep getting is the change we really don't want.
Yeah.
It's just a hall of mirrors. It's bait and switch, whatever you want to call it, sleight of hand. It's like, here, you want this, right? But we're going to give you this instead. This is what you really want.
I mean, I remember when back in like 2016, 2017, I remember hearing about, and this was new for me, was all these old former Obama voters voted for Trump. And I'm like, how the fuck do you go from voting for Obama to Trump? And I finally realized after a bit, I'm like, it's because they were outsiders, right? They were changed. It's the same thing with here, nearby in New York City. You've got Trump supporters, rabid Trump supporters who were Mamdani supporters. And people are just like, is that one that seems even crazier to me, right? Because Obama got labeled a socialist and a communist, and he was nothing of the sort. And Mamdani is actually openly socialist. And you got these folks, again, it's all about voting out the incumbents and voting in for, supporting outsiders to try to make actual systemic change. And that's what we need. I don't know, Adam, if it's a matter of we just need to keep voting enough people like this in, and we'll eventually get to that point, right? The critical mass will actually be within the House, within the system. Like, there's a very parliamentarian, very traditionally, classically liberal approach to things, right? Is that we can vote our way out of these problems. The alternative is the revolutionary view, which is the system itself is sick and broken. You can't expect someone to vote against their interests and to change that, so you need to overthrow it.
Leaning really hard towards that now.
I
Unfortunately, it seems.
Yeah. And that gets, for all the reasons, gets messy. And that doesn't mean that your opposition to it goes away. Counter-revolution goes hand in hand with revolution, which leads to not just parliamentary politics being kind of fucked up and violent, right? But also actual interactions being violent out in the open.
Much as people love to talk about, oh, we need this revolution, I don't really think they know what is implied, what is involved in that. A lot of people get hurt.
Exactly. A lot of people get hurt. Your finances get hurt. Your ability to source food, heating oil, right, construction material, all this gets shot to hell.
And I mean, a lot of people like those survivalist videos of people living off the grid, or living with these supplies in the mountains. Those are really cool. And sometimes you like to do shit like that, but you don't want to do it every single day for years.
Yeah,
it's good for a weekend or something like that. You don't want that to be your life.
I'll tell you right now, you think survival off the land is fun until you need a hot shower. Or better yet, you have a wife or a daughter and they go, I want a hot shower, right? Like, I'm not willing to give up some of these basics to, just to be off the grid.
Maybe you have a hot shower, but the guy down the block wants your hot shower.
Then we get into I think we're starting to get into a completely different discussion. But yeah, so it's, like I said, this really kind of tripped me up when I saw the demands from the DOJ to Minnesota. I'm like, what does this have to do with anything? And it's about, because you've got these lawsuits, you've got this pushback from the states against the DOJ, against this administration. But this is very much the direction they're pushing it right there. We're not going to see a canceled election. What we're going to see is an election whose integrity is actively being attacked throughout this year until it happens. And the question is, how much of this is going to be successful versus unsuccessful? At the moment, the states are largely holding firm against federal meddling at this, but it's a lot of time. Like I said, we've got almost 9 months for this to happen. ICE has grown, but ICE's 25,000 troops can't, police every single polling place in every single blue state and every single blue county and town that they want to, right? There's not enough.
That's what the National Guard's for.
Yeah, exactly. So do you start seeing militarization? If you start seeing armed guards, uniformed guards in camo outside of polling places, that should be a real wake-up call in November, if it isn't already.
Wake up, America.
We'll get there. All right, bud, any last thoughts?
No, other than sad ones.
Save your sad thoughts for our next one.
Okay.
No one wants to hear you whinge.
No, they don't. I just don't. Like I said at the beginning, basically, if you think this is gonna not happen, I don't know where you're living.
Exactly. So I think what we're doing, this is definitely not the last time we're going to be talking about this year. So I'm looking forward to.
This is just going to get bigger and bigger.
It's going to get bigger and bigger. And unlike, being the freaking idiot that I am, I will not accidentally delete my notes. And I will, instead of just having my raw notes handy and kind of just scroll through them as quickly as I can as we're talking, because I remember roughly what I want to talk about, we'll be better prepared.
That's good.
All right, dude. All right, everyone. Be safe, be good, stay warm. Catch y'all later.
Bye. Idiots Seeking Village is a production of Village Idiots Media. For more, find us online at villageidiotmedia.com or find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and wherever you get podcasts.